All right. Oh, we're live. Welcome, everyone. I think a few people are being let in at the moment, so I'll just wait another 30 seconds or so before we get started. But yeah, my name's Stephanie Trethewey, and thank you so much to Maya Grazing for holding this event tonight. Maya Grazing do amazing things, not just in their area of expertise, in their amazing platform for grazing managers, but, in mental health and so many things that encompass rural life. So thank you so much to them. I think we'll probably kick things off, and I want to keep tonight, there's a lot to cover, but I want to keep things moving. We want to keep it to 45 minutes and cover as much of the important stuff as we can. So I suppose the best place to start is why and how today came about and what I'm doing here. For those who don't know, I run Motherland Australia, which is a podcast and online community all about supporting, celebrating, and connecting rural mums across Australia. And the reason why I'm really passionate in particular about mental health and perinatal and postnatal mental health is Motherland was born because of my own struggles as a mum. I used to work as a TV journalist. I was very career driven. I fell in love with a beautiful farmer and found myself living here on a farm in Tassie. We run a beef brand, and we moved here with a 6-month-old son. And I really struggled. Motherhood was not what I thought it would be. I felt really alone, really isolated. I struggled when we were on the mainland in Melbourne, but being in a rural area with no access to family, friends, no mother's group, made it even harder. And I found myself in quite a dark place and felt like I'd lost a lot of purpose. And I suppose one day I sort of thought, I've got to pull myself out of this. And the idea for Motherland was born, which was a way for the old Steph, the journalist, to connect with the new Steph, a mum. And that has set me on this incredible journey of self-healing for myself, and also connecting with amazing rural mums and trying to form that connection, that community and that camaraderie, which is so evident across rural Australia, despite how geographically apart that we might be. So that's a bit about what I'm doing here. Tonight is all about focusing on perinatal mental health and the importance of it for rural communities, which really are the backbone of Australia in so many ways. 1 in 3 Australian women live in a regional or rural area. So it's really important that we open this box and start to talk about the unique challenges that come for rural mums and rural dads as well. So my first guest tonight, I want to welcome Arabella Gibson, who is the CEO of the Gidget Foundation, who do incredible work. Thank you to everyone who has joined, because every single person who registered Maya Grazing has generously donated $2 of each registration to the Gidget Foundation. So Arabella, thank you so much for joining us. I suppose it'd be great for those who don't know much about you and Gidget. Can you tell us, what does Gidget do?
Yeah, thanks so much, Steph, and thanks to Maya Grazing for having me as well and for supporting the Gidget Foundation. We feel very lucky and an enormous amount of gratitude to you for having us be a part of this very special event. So I'm the CEO of the Gidget Foundation. My name is Arabella Gibson, and I've been with the foundation for nearly 5 years now. The Gidget Foundation began through, sadly, a great tragedy. There was a gorgeous girl whose nickname was Gidget. Her real name was Louise, and she had longed for a little bub of her own, and her and her husband had spent quite some time and effort and energy going through infertility treatment and so on to try and get their much longed for little bub. And after quite a kind of heartache journey, they managed to get there, and they had their little bub Jasmine, and everything seemed kind of perfect, really. Gidget had this really kind of vibrant, dynamic, fun, beautiful personality where everything always just looked like it was meant to be. And she was, she always had bright red lipstick on or bright red nail polish on, and she wore bright red shoes to her wedding. Like, she just had some vibrancy about her. And you could never have really known what she was feeling inside. And she was really suffering, and she was suffering from unrecognized postnatal depression. And I just remember really clearly standing at Gidget's funeral and looking around and thinking, how could this happen? How could this be? unfortunately, she was just feeling such an incredible amount of fear and denial and shame and stigma attached to this illness. And in actual fact, the great sadness and tragedy of this is that, you know, we know that this illness is recoverable. We know that with the right support and with the right help, you can recover. So the Gidget Foundation was born through Gidget's passing, and today we have gone on as part of her legacy to support thousands upon thousands of Australians with their perinatal mental health and supporting them to get onto that journey of recovery. And we understand that, you know, parenting is a challenge, and, you know, with the right tips and tools and guidance and support and treatment, you can very much go on to live a really happy, joyful and fulfilled life. And so, yeah, it's a great tragedy that it happened, but here we are. We have Gidget Foundation now, and we have a number of programs that support people right across the country.
Yeah, and speaking of those programs, tell us a bit about some of the services available to rural families.
Yeah, look, we have a number of different services available. I'll start with our face-to-face program, which probably sounds a bit odd because you might think face-to-face in regional or rural Australia, but yes, it's true. Around 50% of our Gidget houses are based in regional areas. So, for example, we have a Gidget house in Toowoomba, Wagga, Dubbo, Coffs, Taree, lots of other places, but of course I can't remember off the top of my head right this minute. They're on our website. And our Gidget houses offer up to 20 free clinical psychological sessions with a perinatal mental health specialist. So we actually employ over 65 clinicians Australia-wide, and they're available to offer that support face-to-face through our Gidget House program. And then we also offer exactly the same initiative, which is up to 20 free clinical psychological sessions with a perinatal mental health specialist via our Start Talking program, which is our telehealth program, and that's available nationally. And we actually began this program about 2 years before the pandemic, which was slightly fortuitous because when the pandemic hit, we were able to flip all of our face-to-face services into telehealth services, you know, within 24 hours, which was magical, because it meant that the services that we were providing people were able to continue. And we know that this cohort, new parents, expectant parents, they find it hard to get out of the house. They find it hard to travel. They find it hard after perhaps cesarean. And certainly in regional and rural areas, there's very few areas that you can actually go and get this kind of support from. So we are very much bringing very specialist support directly into the home of those who need it. So there are our clinical treatment programs. Did you want me to go through some of the more kind of accessible programs, Steph?
No, I think it's a good, I guess, a good overview. What I really liked is you mentioned the pandemic, and I think something that's really important is people who live in urban areas that have access, who might have had access to their own counsellor or psychologist physically in person. They've lost that, just like mothers in the cities have lost their mothers groups. A lot of us in rural communities have been living a pandemic lifestyle always. You know, we don't always have access to certain services. So I think that, I don't want to say there's a silver lining because this pandemic is horrific, but I think it's great that we're all kind of in it together now. And perhaps some of the services that Gidget are focusing on now, which are more virtual and all around Australia, telehealth services, I think are really important, for rural mothers and fathers. So I suppose looking ahead, what sort of plans and projects does Gidget have in the pipeline to help support rural families?
Yes, we've got something called our Gidget Virtual Village. We're really conscious that people have lost that traditional village in the cities, but also in regional areas. They may not have, access to mothers groups, fathers groups, all those kind of traditional support mechanisms, particularly with family living distance and that sort of thing. So we've developed a Facebook peer moderated group, which is a really safe, judgment-free space, which sounds strange when I'm talking about social media, but it's true. And we've also got a couple of really, really good videos that we've just recently launched, an antenatal video and a dad's video, which are a marked improvement on the ones that were done back in the 1970s. And I think, what we're trying to do really with rural communities is try to develop that workforce, but also foster community amongst new mums. And that's, I guess, why Motherland is also so good.
Yeah, and I suppose just to wrap up, we've got Perinatal Mental Health Week coming up in November, I believe. We're collaborating, Motherland and Gidget, to sort of shine a light on rural and regional families in particular. So what can rural families and mums that have jumped on can expect to see, in that week, because that is an important week?
Yeah, look, it is. And what we've done is we've collaborated with 35 organisations Australia-wide who look after people with, perinatal mental health supports. And what we'll be doing is every day of that week, we'll be focusing on different kind of themes or areas within perinatal mental health. And we've got a dedicated day to regional, rural and remote communities. And we'd really love just to for people to share that voice and that message, to really get that message out there and try and encourage people to talk and to listen as well. Because we often say, it's so important. You ask the question, are you okay? Da-di-da-di-da. But actually what's really important also is to listen. And if someone doesn't sound 100%, then just ask again and keep listening and keep talking and open that conversation. So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Arabella. For everyone who's joined us, you can check out the Gidget Foundation on their website, on social media, $2 being donated from each of you registering tonight to this amazing cause. So Arabella, thank you so much for jumping on, telling us a bit about what you guys do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Steph. Thanks very much to My Grazing as well for having me. Thank you.
No worries. And I've just seen a few more people joined us, and people are chatting in the chat room, letting us know where they're dialing in from, which is awesome. So hi to everyone. I should mention, if you have got any questions, you can jump on the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of the screen. So I'll check that as we go. And if anyone's got any questions as the conversation unfolds, please feel free to chuck something there. Now, tonight is all about motherhood, and the juggle is real, as we can see. Steph, you've got your hands full there, and that's what life's like, particularly when you're married to a farmer, when they're not always home on time and they work 7 days a week. So yeah, I know it's a bit of a juggle. So thank you so much for being here tonight. For those who don't know Steph, she is a psychologist, she's a farmer, she's a mum, and she's also AgriFuture's South Australian Rural Woman of the Year. So Steph, thank you so much for jumping on despite the juggle. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you. I was so excited to join when you asked me to come on board, and I did have my husband lined up, but he ended up being down at our other farm this week, which is 2.5 hours away. And then, of course, this is the day when my 4-year-old bumped his head after at daycare, and then this guy's decided he doesn't want to go to sleep tonight. So that's all right. We're talking to the right audience.
We're talking to the right audience, yeah. And we all get it. Look, Steph, we'll jump in. Tell us a bit about yourself. For those who don't know you, tell us a bit about where you live and what you're up to, and a bit about you.
Yeah, so I live in in a place called Wilmot Cattle Co in South Australia. We're about 2 hours north of Adelaide. So for people in SA, or if anyone knows it, it's near Burra area. And we're on a broadacre sheep and cropping farm, and it's pretty marginal country. So for us, we thought this year we were coming out of drought. Darcy here was our rain baby, and it rained after he was born last year. But still a little bit touch and go this year, so it's just that ongoing uncertainty there. I grew up in Adelaide though, so I grew up with no connections to farming life until I met my husband when I was working in a pub while going through uni, which is then when I kind of transitioned and started out into psychology as well. And I guess so I kind of find myself in this position as a psychologist and a farmer and a wife and a mum, and all of the hats that we juggle. And for me, I guess it's also been a personal journey as well, in that I've got a 7-year-old and 4-year-old sons as well. And after my 7-year-old was born, it was a pretty big learning curve. He is pretty high energy, and I ended up getting postnatal depression when he was about 7 months old. So that was kind of my first time around experience. And then I kind of did pretty well preparing second time around, and then third time around having Darcy, also having won the Rural Women's Award, my high achiever self probably took on a little bit too much again last year. And I found myself probably this time when he was about kind of 2 or 3 months, actually this time being aware of the symptoms in myself. And I think, well, actually it was my 6-week checkup with the doctor, and went for my checkup and burst into tears and went, we've got to talk about me, not how my body's going at the moment. So, yeah.
And how, paint us a bit of a picture, because I feel like mums are really good at skimming over the hard stuff, like, I had postnatal depression and, I'm over that now, or I battled my way through it. I've spoken to almost 100 rural mums now, and it's a bit of a theme that we rural mums are tough, or we're certainly jelly beans. Paint us a bit of a picture, like how bad did it get? Because, you and I know each other personally a little bit as well. And I've spoken to you before a little bit. It was quite bad. So just tell us a bit about how that was.
So first time around, I kind of got to that point where you can't see it yourself. Like, I knew I wasn't doing well, but it really got to the point where it was my sister and my husband kind of almost a bit of an intervention, going, something needs to change. And I kind of was really struggling to see a way out. And it wasn't for myself that I was suicidal, but for me, it was those moments where, like, I'd be giving my son a bath and just kind of thoughts would pop up of, like, what happens if he just slips under the water, and incredibly scary kind of having those thoughts. But it was just that pure level of exhaustion that I was at. But then also, once you start working with a psychologist and GP, kind of realising it's not just the exhaustion level, there's all those extra factors of the hormones and not necessarily having great supports or in-person supports around as well. So that was probably really the turning point. And at that time with him, he started probably at 7 months, and I was kind of just lying there with him moving all around me, kind of just really didn't know what to do next. And then this time around, I guess I probably intervened a little bit closer, a little bit earlier for myself, having that bit more of an awareness. But even still, like, I try and keep a bit of a journal, particularly a gratitude journal, but often in times it's a venting journal as well. And I look back over that kind of, well, pretty much this time last year, September, October, and there's just so much stuff about being a failure and how I'm not doing this and I'm kind of letting everyone else down. And I look back and I go, oh, you actually just weren't well. It wasn't that I was any of those things. And for me also, this time around with the 3 kids, it's also been that incredibly hard managing those the pressures and the frustrations. Like, there were times at bedtimes, because it was still often just me putting all the boys to bed, and we'd just all be there in tears, and then ending up screaming like literally screaming at my kids for not really reasonable things either. So a lot of that rage that kind of started to come out. So it was more of almost that anger and rage side, which even as a psychologist, it was only when I kind of did a bit of Googling, which isn't always the ideal thing, that I started seeing that, again, I wasn't alone in that either.
How was that for you, being a trained psychologist? You of all people are trained to know the signs and are trained to help people, but obviously you struggled to help yourself for quite some time, because to get to the point where you're looking at your child in the bath thinking those thoughts, or being in the fetal position, that's bad, Steph. That is really bad and really serious, and we can't skim over it without saying, how did you let yourself get to that point? And have you ever thought, I should have helped myself, of all people, because I'm trained to do this?
Yeah, I think it's almost like a double-edged sword, in that kind of having that knowledge then means having higher expectations on yourself, and particularly in terms of my expectations of how I was going to do parenting, especially that first time around, of high expectations of attachment parenting and needing to meet all of his needs. I ended up going to a sleep clinic with him in Adelaide. We got in just before he turned 1, which was the cutoff. And there was lots of stuff that I couldn't take on from what they did, because I guess I still, like with Darcy, who's over 1 now, still ends up in us most nights. Like, that's still, I've come to accept that's the way I parent. But one of the things the counsellors there did say to me was, she was like, you can't have your child, like, the son absorbing absolutely everything from you, because that's actually not meeting his needs. If you've got nothing left to give to him, that you actually have to make sure you're managing your needs just as much as him. So that's probably been something that's a constant battle for me to remember, that I have to put my needs in there. But coming back to those thoughts around me as a psychologist, I think almost in a way it's potentially why it went longer the first time, because it was kind of like I could see the signs and I was like, no, I've got this, you know what you should be doing, Steph, like, come on, just get it together. And yeah, we can't actually do it all on our own either. Like if we don't have the supports. And for me, the first time my parents had headed off overseas for kind of 5 months, we were in a really good year on the farm, which meant my husband was working around the clock. Our local child and youth health nurse wasn't particularly helpful. She kind of said when he was tearing the place apart at 7 months, that, oh, maybe you've just got a high energy baby, you just got to deal with it. And also made the comment at one point that we've got volunteer staff that can come out and help, but they can't get to your house on the bumpy roads at the moment. So it was just a kind of melting pot of lots of different factors. And it's probably in hindsight now that I can see it's all of that, not just me.
Thank you for being so brave and sharing those very personal details, because there would absolutely be mums who have struggled with their mental health and have struggled with certain thoughts and you know, postpartum rage, all those things, and don't actively share that because there is a lot of shame attached to it. Why do you think that is? Because there seems to be obviously an expectation when you become a mum, it's the greatest gift on earth, and there's certainly the perfect mother myth where we believe it's all about self-sacrifice, and the more we sacrifice, the better mums we are, but at what expense? So, you know, how do you feel like that sets us up in some ways for failure from a self-care point of view? Because as you said, it took you a while to realize that you weren't looking after yourself at all, and I think a lot of us mums can relate to that.
Yeah, I think it really is. Like we are almost set up for failure in that there's such an emphasis, one, on the fact that you will love every minute of motherhood, and that parenting is this amazing journey that you're going to take on, when in reality there's lots of amazing parts, but there are also some absolutely kind of gut-wrenching and horrible and just yuck parts as well, like just the pure fact of looking after someone's bodily functions for so long. But so I think like it's just not talked about. And I found that a lot with lots of my friends who didn't have kids, and they'd hear me talk about the tough parts and they'd be like, oh, is it worth it? And I'm like, oh, it's 100% worth it. But you also have to know just how hard it is as well. But I think as women, like, I just see, particularly for our generation, I think we grew up with this idea that we can be everything, we can have these amazing careers, I never kind of questioned growing up that I would have any opportunity to do anything. But then all of a sudden you meet, I think potentially as well added, if you meet a farmer, and throw farming life in there. But you meet your partner, you get married, have a baby, and then your life is the one that does all of the changing. And really, particularly on farm, like there's no paternity leave for farmers. Well, there's 2 weeks government paid leave for business owners, but that doesn't really happen in practice. And the farm doesn't stop, and I know that. And like for us, it's kind of known. We both signed the dotted line on our debts, and like we're in it together. But there's also been a huge amount of sacrifice for myself, but for women in general. And so then I think in that time when you're on maternity leave, when you're looking after a baby, there's this real juggle between I'm loving being with my kid, but also there's so much more to me than this as well. I think I went way off track with your question there.
Oh, no, all super important. I think this is when we come into the unique aspects of rural parenting and rural motherhood. Is you've got, you know, mums really are the backbone of rural communities, because as you said, like there is a lot of sacrifice, particularly if you are married to a farmer. Even if you've got your own business as you do, you still come second in a lot of ways, because the farm, you marry a farmer, you marry the land, and there's a lot of amazing things that come with that. But unless you've lived it, it's very hard to articulate how difficult that can be when you think about you're geographically isolated, you're socially isolated, you're isolated from your partner. They're often out the door early, home super late, 7 days a week. I mean, personally, Sam has 1 weekend off a month, and that's an improvement on what he previously had. And, you know, you're spending a lot of time with your kids alone. And you can't underestimate how significant that is for your own mental, emotional well-being. As I said earlier, we're seeing, you know, women in the city that are now in that situation for the first time because daycares are shut. A lot of rural mums don't have access to daycare. They're all working from home. A lot of rural mums, whether they're working as a mum or working their own business, have to work from home on the farm. So we're starting to see these two worlds come together a bit. And I think it's really important to highlight that rural mums definitely have a very unique situation with our family setup. So what are some of the areas that you think we can do to improve support for rural mums? Because everyone suffers in silence. Like, motherhood is like this club that we all belong to and we all claim to be really open about, but just like what you went through, there's absolutely rural mums out there that aren't seeking help. You know, I did the Motherland Your Say survey and I looked at that today, and over 50% of rural mums, which over 250 answered that survey, over 50% said they suffered from postnatal depression and anxiety, but more than 50% of those didn't seek help. So we're seeing a pattern here is, you know, they say 1 in 4 suffer from mental health struggles. I wouldn't be surprised if it's much higher than that, but then it's accessing support. So where do you see the weak spots for supporting rural mums?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely starting to break down that silence. Like I remember I had like a barbecue kind of when my oldest was a year or two old, and there was a few of us with kids all around the same age. And all of a sudden, because we were out of the depths of it, we were then talking about how tough it was for us at the time, but it was like we just had to put on this front when we were actually in it as well. So I think just starting to break down that stereotype of the perfect mum, one, because it lets go of those expectations for us, but two, then it allows that space to open up the conversation. And I think Arabella said it at the start of kind of like, if you ask someone if they're fine and they say, yeah, I am, then kind of that check in, because we're so good at saying that we are when we're not. And I think then kind of it's a hard line of normalising some of those challenges, but also kind of highlighting the difference of if things aren't like that balance between the normal challenges of motherhood, but then also knowing, okay, what does it look like when it goes into more of like that perinatal anxiety and depression as well. I think also, like as you said, the pandemic started to highlight that finding some ways of creating that sense of connection is just so incredibly important. And I know that's like where your Motherland group, I'm a part of it just as a member, and it just comes in so great to have a space where you can kind of whinge about the fact of your husband not whinge, but talk about the fact of your husband not being home 7 days a week without some of those like other social expectations of, well, he should be doing 50% of the housework or he should be home, like that normalising the challenges of farming life, but also gently shifting it as well. So I've got 3 sons, so I would love to see things different for when they've got their families, but it's, yeah, I think there's lots of big challenges out there.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I feel like rural men often cop a bit of flack for not being, I guess, open with their emotions. And that's quite common in the rural sector, is like the strong, tough farmer that doesn't open up about their own struggles. But I think there's a lot to say for rural mums as well, is we do just get on with it. And I feel like sometimes we feel like we just have to, because the family kind of rests on us in a way. You know, if we fall apart, the whole operation falls apart. Again, one of the unique challenges of living where you work and working where you live on the land. So I suppose, you know, in terms of accessing resources, there's no doubt that telehealth services and, you know, there's Hotlers, Gidget does the Start Talking campaign, Panda has their service as well. How important is it for rural mums to take that step? Because it is like, I feel like a lot of rural mums I talk to are actually more inclined to tell strangers about their struggles that they've met online, like in the Motherland community, than they are their own partners. Like I have found it in the past very difficult to actually sit down and tell Sam some of the struggles I was having, but then I'd connect with another rural mum and I was more than happy to just blurb everything to her. So how important is it for mums to sort of seek that help, and how can they seek help?
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like, even if you've got a really strong relationship, particularly in farming, it's kind of like you don't want to add an extra burden onto them often as well, because they're doing the best they can, and it's starting to have those conversations, but also getting those additional supports. And I think it really is important. And there are all the different tools around. So like with Gidget Foundation, their tools sound fantastic. This time around I actually accessed through the Panda helpline, but also on through Mind Mum, where there's an app, but also an online program. There was a kind of peer support coaching program. And just, again, that talking to a stranger who's kind of been through similar, but also I think I talked about, and I'm like, oh, we've got shearing going on and I'm cooking for this and doing that. And she was like, Steph, you're doing a huge amount. And that validation sometimes. And I think that's what blows me away, particularly in the Motherland group, is the conversations that I had around, I'm 30 weeks pregnant and we're preparing for harvest and I need to get X amount of meals prepared, not to prepare for the family with a newborn, but prepare for the harvest team or for shearing. Like, those expectations are huge, and I think we don't realise that they're actually pretty abnormal outside of the rural mum sphere, and even just that willingness to chuck the kids in the car if everyone's if you need to help shift machinery, or just those odd jobs. And I think it's sometimes just kind of taking our hats off to each other and recognising the incredible job that we are doing as well. But yeah, still that encouragement to seek support, because it's cool that there are some really good services out there.
Yeah, it's just taking that step. But you're so right. It's taking our hats off to ourselves, because every single week that I interview a rural mum, like if I had $1, she says, oh, I don't know if my story is interesting, or, oh, but my struggles aren't that bad. And you listen, and it's something as simple as parenting, during harvesting or sowing or whatever. Like, those are enormous challenges, as you said. When I spoke to a mum who's up at 5 a.m. cooking for the workers while having a newborn that they've got to breastfeed, and a toddler, and maybe another kid, full-time working as well as raising kids on the farm. Husband's not around. For everything that's beautiful about farm life, as I said, that it's seriously tough sometimes. And I think that we're so bad at giving ourselves credit for this very unique lifestyle. And I think it's even more important that you pay attention to yourself and put yourself first, as hard as that is, because you kind of otherwise set yourself, you just layer upon layer of stress. And it sounds like you've kind of been there. And in saying that, baby number 3, so like you went through postnatal depression. By the sounds of it, baby number 2 was okay, and then it reared its ugly head last year. Like, how are you going? Like, how are you going now? Because you've got a lot on.
Yeah, and I've come to work out I'm someone who does function. I actually had a catch up with my psychologist a couple of weeks ago and did identify I function pretty well at just under that red level of a lot going on. So I'm probably the personality suited to this life, but what it means is little things doesn't take long to tip my if I'm juggling everything on the edge, it can tip over into stress pretty quickly. Generally now going pretty well. For me, it definitely has been, I think, finding that I need to have my stuff for me in there, and that's okay as well. And like, Darcy's been in childcare 3 days a week since he was, I think, about 6 or 7 months, which is earlier than for that amount that I started the others. But we're lucky in that we've got an amazing childcare nearby. I was heading in daily anyway for the school drop off. And I kind of just realised that for me, the motherhood, that those almost like that parenting role of the really, what our daycarers do a phenomenal job at. That's one of my weaknesses. I'm not very good at that, just sitting and playing all day. So it doesn't end up being that healthy for all of us. Whereas having them in a place where they love, and then me doing my job that I actually really love, then squeezing the farm side that I do enjoy but need to just get done in there. That's actually probably the most important thing that I've done for my mental health as well. Plus remembering to actually stop from all of that sometimes and just have a Netflix binge occasionally, or just yeah, allowing my brain to stop sometimes as well.
What's your advice for any like mums struggling that feel like they can't get the pressure off? Like, you know, for us, I remember being in a fetal position on the floor, really sick a few months ago, with Elliot and Evie around me because they were sick and so much work. And I just wanted to call my mum, who's in Sydney, great place to be right now, couldn't even call my mum to get mum, to come and just take the kids. Like, I was sick, it's hard to look after yourself when you've got little ones that need looking after. So for rural mums that, they can't access family support, they don't have daycare, where do you begin to just try and put yourself first? Because we talk about a lot, and I talk about a lot, and I sometimes feel like, even on the show that I say it, but I don't actually know what that looks like, those baby steps. It's not like there's a silver bullet, like you wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to do yoga and like off you go. But, what are some like small things that rural mums who feel like environmentally they don't have a lot to support them, what are some things they can do?
Yeah, well, one thing I always think about, so there's a psychologist that specialises in perinatal mental health, Amanda Donna, and she talked once about this idea that when mums are struggling, we often, and it's like they're swimming underwater, and we give them that respite to come up and breathe for a couple of minutes. But what we actually need to do is help mums learn to swim underwater, give them the tools to swim underwater rather than just is going, here's 5 minutes to come up and breathe. And I was like, oh my God, that's so true. So it's finding, like you said, just those little baby steps of what your tools are to swim underwater. So it might, like, for me, and it's funny, my oldest son started to know what these things are as well. So for me, it's just like having my warm glass of lemon water in the morning and actually making sure I take the time to just drink that without getting distracted by everything else. Like, it's doing a couple minutes of breathing pauses. Like, we don't have time to do huge, amazing things. Some people do manage to squeeze that in there, and I dream of one day being this person who can get up at 5 and do my hour morning routine before the kids get up, but I'm a bit off that. So I think it's just like literally finding those 5-minute break points that you can put in, and just pick one or two of them. Like, don't try and take on anything huge, or it might be making sure that when you go outside with the kids for a bit, actually going out and enjoying playing with them for a bit, instead of getting caught up in, I should be doing this bookwork, or I should be doing this, or need to fold the washing. Just actually taking that time to play, because I think we're really bad at sometimes doing that as well. So finding those one or two tools to help yourself breathe underwater, and then knowing that it actually takes practice to do that. It's not a quick fix that is an automatic thing either.
Yeah, the morning routine thing, I've read a lot about that, and I've known some mums that get up before their kids get up, and I love that idea of having that hour, that golden hour to yourself. And I think I tried it a couple of times, and I'm tired, like I'm just exhausted, and it's almost like extra pressure, and then you feel like a failure if you don't follow through with that routine, because you see mummies on Instagram that are like up with their green tea before the kids, and journaling and doing all this amazing stuff, but it's not feasible for all of us, and then you feel like you're failing at that. So I really like what you said. It's learning to find moments and learning how to swim underwater, when you do feel like you're drowning, finding ways to deal with that, not just thinking it's just coming up for air, but actually how to manage your day-to-day reality, and finding those little moments, if it's 5 minutes here or there. So and I guess, speaking of tools, you're now dedicating your work and your life to helping rural communities and helping resilience and mental health resilience for rural communities. I can't think of many people that are better placed to do that, given what you've been through personally. So tell us a bit about your business, Act for Ag, and what you're focusing on now, and what you hope to do for rural communities.
Yeah, thank you. So it really has been drawn from my experience of those challenges of farming life, but also I kind of realised, hang on, there are really simple, effective tools that we can actually all put in place. We don't have to be at that crisis point to put them in. We shouldn't have to wait till we get to see a psychologist to learn these tools and ideas. So I've created Act for Ag. I was fortunate to be the 2020 South Australian AgriFuture Rural Women's Award winner. A bit of a mouthful, but from that, I, with the bursary funding, developed my project. So it's a printed toolkit originally my idea was more around an app, but I found the printed toolkit is kind of great in that it opens up conversations. Once you leave it on the kitchen table, it then can give a bit of a way of starting those tricky conversations. So it's a tools for putting in place those small steps, again, coming back to those small steps that we can do every day to look after ourselves, but also bringing in the relationships and the idea around working towards our shared purpose, because I think particularly on farm, it's this place where your farm is your home, but it's your business, and your husband is your colleague and your work partner, and sometimes the only adult that you see for long periods of time, or other people are negotiating whole complex family systems in there as well. So I wanted to have a tool that actually just helps people sit down and look at, okay, what's most important to us? What's the stuff that gets in the way of that? And what can we do to kind of just move towards what's important to us, even when all the tricky stuff shows up? So that's pretty much the approach in a nutshell. And the way I've run it out so far is doing really introductory sessions to the materials at field days and also online. Zoom's shown me that it can work pretty well online. And then doing in-depth 4-week sessions where we come together as a small group. So really the emphasis is around creating that community and connection so that we're not feeling so alone in this journey, because I think whether it's around perinatal, mental health, or just the everyday challenges of farming life, often we feel like we're the only ones, or our relationship's the only one that deals with these hiccups, or our business is the only one doing this. But when we all come together, like I find it amazing every time when I work through these tools, and we'll be on a Jamboard and everyone popping in their own thoughts, and they'll be from all different places. Then we all share so many of the same experiences and challenges and rewards. So it's this shared sense of connection and moving forward through that together.
No, I love what you're doing. I've seen your amazing toolkit and some like really great, simple but effective, strategies in there. And it's just so amazing what you're doing, focusing on rural families. But I did want to touch on, like, before we sort of wrap up soon, is, you shared earlier, for anyone that just joined us, is you shared some very personal things about what you went through with your postnatal depression. And I remember sharing about my miscarriage, and I had a flood of messages from mums being like, oh, thank you for being so brave. And brave is a word that gets thrown around so much as if it's a badge of honor to wear, like, I'm so brave for sharing something that a lot of women have been through, but for whatever reason have decided not to share publicly. For me personally, it was almost like therapeutic. Like, I felt like getting it out there not only helped other mums, but for me, it's like I had to offload. How has it been for you? Like, because very personal stuff, you're a professional psychologist, you've shared some stuff that a lot of mums, maybe they've been through, but would just not dare speak aloud for fear of shame and judgment. But you've gone there. Why have you gone there?
I think for me, it is that same thing of sharing the story to hopefully help someone else feel like, oh, hang on, this isn't me failing, this is me struggling, or this is me being unwell as well. And I think probably, through the award experience, but also just starting through social media and things, like, you just realise just how powerful stories are. And it's been an interesting learning curve, because as psychologists, we kind of get trained to be blank slates almost. Like, I had one of the lecturers at uni kind of wouldn't even wear her wedding ring in sessions. So it's a bit of a learning curve around that. But I think in order to help people know that we are real people too, and this stuff happens, it doesn't discriminate, it happens to anyone, that we have to be real about it. And I guess it's that thing of it's the same, like your story might become someone else's survival guide or something along those lines. But the more we can open up about this, hopefully it's then just going to flow on and help others as well.
Well, Steph, your story is a very powerful one. We did speak on the podcast, I think it was last year, and some of your story, like, it took my breath away a bit, because I remember struggling a bit, and just having someone speak so honestly. It's almost like the deeper someone goes, it encourages more people to share, because when someone shares something so intense, people that are suffering maybe not as intensely feel like they can share theirs, and it's not, you know what I mean? Like it's not like it's a competition, but sometimes it just takes someone else to share something like a bit more intense for you to be like, oh, that's okay. So what I'm going through is definitely okay. And I can start to open up, and it is normal. And I just think it's so important. And look, before we wrap up, I actually feel a bit emotional. Evie's due for a feed soon. Is just having watched you tonight, you know, on this call, like with your baby, breastfeeding, talking, being so, yeah, just so articulate about everything. And he's out like a light now. Like, just, I hope you realize, you know, talking
not
about
a child tonight.
talking about taking our hats off to each other. Seriously, Steph, like, yeah, I'd have anxiety having to have my baby with me on a you know, semi-professional call like this. So and I know there's other people that have written some messages here, but you're amazing just for being here tonight and what you've juggled tonight. So just please, I hope you know that you're an amazing mum, and yeah, you're absolutely amazing. And I've just loved talking to you tonight. It's been really important, and I can't wait to sort of see how your program unfolds and everything you're doing for rural mums. And I think it's just keeping the conversation going. Like, it sounds so corny, but it's just so true. Like, we just have to keep talking about it and finding more people like you who go deep, who go hard, and get their stories out there, because we're not going to normalize it if we just go like baby steps. Like, there's some things that you just need to break through and just get rid of the stigma and keep pushing. And that's one of the reasons I love, you know, what I do, and working and talking to amazing rural women like you. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's been, you know, I could talk to you a lot longer, but yeah, I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. No, and it's, yeah, I don't know, when you were just talking there, I get this image of almost like breaking the ice. Like, sometimes there's some places that we just go with a little pickaxe, but sometimes we just need to smash that and just like talk about it in a real way. And also having that comfort to know that, yeah, we can start to turn up on Zooms. I hope I didn't. I realised I probably actually potentially had some nipple slips there, so sorry about that, anyone out there. But just that doing this is part of parenting, and it's part of living, and it's just part of what we do. And that's probably been my favourite thing about the pandemic, is it's opened up. Like, I gave a Zoom presentation to a psychology graduate careers night when Darcy was 6 weeks old, and I was bribing, again, ended up being home by myself that night, and ended up bribing the other two with ice cream, and they ate it all, and I was like, just take the whole bucket, just do whatever you need to do. But again, it's giving all of those young people that insight that this is the real deal. This is all part of life, and it's broken down that invisible barrier that I think we used to put in place and keep our work life over here and our family life separate. There's no, it's all together, especially on farm.
That's for sure. No, thank you, Steph. And we'll wrap up shortly. And thank you to everyone who's jumped on board. This meeting, this event will be available as a video, which will be circulated in the coming days, which is great. So I'd love it for any mums to pass it on to others that might need to hear it. I think tonight's been a really beautiful collaboration between three women and three organizations, you know, Arabella Gibson, the CEO of Gidget Foundation, who joined us earlier, who's still listening. You know, what they do is amazing, and the reach that they have, the breadth that they have, and the focus on rural communities is amazing. Steph, what you do for rural mums, being actually embedded in a rural community as a rural mum who's been there, who's struggled, and now helping others. And then Motherland, and where I see it as being that storyteller to try and get these amazing stories out there. It's so important. And yeah, it is important work. So thank you so much to Arabella. Thank you to Steph. I'm not sure if we have a slide that's going up or not, but yeah, I suppose if anyone needs more help, you know, obviously there's Lifeline and Beyond Blue and those services, but check out the Gidget Foundation, check out Act for Ag, which is Steph's business. And if you're interested in hearing from more rural mums, Motherland, of course. But a huge thanks to Maya Grazing for having us tonight and making this happen. You really, really appreciate it. Arabella's just put the number for the Gidget Foundation and the website in the chat as well. Anyway, thank you, beautiful mums, beautiful women, and any dads that might have jumped on. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.